Most of the world's frontline fighters have heritages that date back to the mid-1960s. This is also true regarding the West's only vertical takeoff and landing fighter, the Harrier Jump Jet. Of all the fighters in service during the last half of the last century, it's the Harrier that was one of the most radical. But as the clock moves us forward into this new century, new thoroughbred fighters are emerging, and the Harrier's replacement is an outstanding technical achievement. Lockheed's lineup of the three variants of the Joint Strike Fighter, or JSF, is an example of the next generation of strike aircraft, and the STOVL version is perhaps the most visually exciting. This craft was developed to take over the Harrier's role. So far, the JSF has commitments from the US Air Force, the US Navy, the US Marine Corps, and the British Royal Navy. The story of VTOL aircraft begins way back in time. The Hawker P-1127 was a single-jet engine plane and was the first real and workable VTOL. It was a pioneer that showed the world that a jet aircraft could take off and land like a helicopter, yet reach jet fighter speeds. This later P-1127 was called a Kestrel, and its first flight took place during March 1964, 3.5 years after the first tentative hover of the original P-1127. In horizontal flight, it performed admirably against the full-blown fighters of the day. But it could also make a vertical landing, and this was the real strength of the craft. At the Farnborough Air Show, two Kestrels showed a stunned crowd what they could do. They outperformed a Hunter fighter jet. They beat the Hunter in speed, range, and rate of climb. The breakthrough to achieving reliable VTOL was the Pegasus engine. It was designed by the Bristol Siddeley Company, which became part of Rolls-Royce in 1966. The uniqueness of the engine was the 4 rotatable nozzles that determined the aircraft's direction. The single-jet engine was about 8 foot long. However, for its day, it was extremely powerful. It generated about 21,500 pounds of thrust. With the nozzle unit already in place, the engine was lowered into the airframe. To give the plane maximum hover and landing maneuverability, the nozzles were arranged with 2 forward of the plane's center of gravity and 2 rearward. 2 compressed air-driven motors were employed to drive a system of rods and chains, which moved all 4 nozzles in unison. Their full rotation is 99 degrees, and they can achieve that in 1 second. By the mid-1960s, P-1127s and Kestrels had made hundreds of VTOLs in a variety of conditions and environments, such as water-sodden runways, deserts, and grass fields. It was learned that some conditions weren't suitable for VTOLs. Engine exhaust from a Harrier's underbelly vents can kick up large pieces of material that can get sucked in the craft's air intake, and this virtually chokes the engine. The craft loses lift and crashes to the ground. However, the planes and pilots were already able to conduct STOs or short takeoffs, which proved to be a better proposition than VTOL. The standard form of operation for the planes was STOVL, or short takeoff and vertical landing. At air shows, Kestrels were a crowd pleaser. After a number of fast passes and a few aerobatics, the Kestrels then showed the crowd their real capability. At low levels, the pilots used the puffer jets, which are located on the wingtips, nose and tail. The jets use highly compressed air to allow the plane to perform pitches, pirouettes, rolls, or just hover. All these can be performed even in strong winds. Normal jet fighters have high stall speeds, and landing one on an aircraft carrier is a difficult skill that requires much training. It also requires huge teams of people and a very sophisticated catapult system for takeoffs. On the contrary, a VTOL aircraft simply requires a flat piece of tarmac in the middle of the ocean to both land and take off from. This early GR model Harrier is performing a world first. It's landing on a ship's helipad. Never before had a jet fighter landed on such a small platform in the middle of the sea. This feat was done while the ship was rolling at 12 degrees and the wind was blowing at 35 knots, and the ship's superstructure caused severe turbulence. Regardless of the conditions, the Harrier was easily able to make repeated vertical landings and takeoffs. The Harrier continued to be developed over 4 decades, and some say the plane's only shortcoming was its inability to go supersonic. The JSF is designed to go supersonic, but interestingly, the brief for its design stated high performance was not a requirement, though of course it is desirable.
Burner. And there's a kick.
Performance was specified to be comparable to existing F-16s and F/A-18s operating in the strike role, though any incidental improvements in performance were welcome. The ostensible ease at which the Harrier or JSF can hover clouds the real and difficult technicalities that have to be overcome to achieve such an extraordinary performance. The beginnings of VTOL can be traced back to this interesting-looking machine. The press of the day unglamorously named it the Flying Bedstead. The fact was, this odd-looking contraption paved the way for jet engines to be used to power planes that could be operated without an airfield. The problems of VTOL were substantial, and its development was in fact the designing of a totally new machine. It was not a simple case of creating a new type of plane. By 1955, the next generation of VTOL emerged. 2 short SC-1s were built in Belfast. They were equipped with 5 jet engines, 4 to provide the downforce for lift, and the 5th provided the thrust required for horizontal flight. Chief pilot Tom Brooks-Smith flew the plane for the first time. He managed to lift off, conduct a horizontal flight, and land. At about the same time, another simpler plane was being tested in California. The United States Air Force was trying out their new X-13 Vertijet. It was an impressive-looking machine. The thrust was via a new Rolls-Royce jet engine, and the plane had good speed, but it was twitchy and very difficult to fly. It was even more difficult to land the plane vertically. The pilot was blind in relationship to the ground, and the design never went any further. It was the Europeans that took up the challenge of VTOL. West Germany developed this craft called the Bach 991V. Some components came from the SC, such as the single-lift jet nozzles. The reason the Europeans saw merit in VTOL is that they feared airfields would be the first casualty in a combat situation. This would ground their fighters, and VTOL was a very real option. Through trial and error, the Harrier was finally born. It's one of the most unique aircraft ever built. It's been described as one of the smallest and most elusive fighters in the world. Another feature of the Harrier is that it's very easy to hide. For countries that feel their airfields are vulnerable, the Harrier is their choice of fighter. The Harrier didn't sell as well as it probably should have, even though it proved itself as an outstanding success in the Falklands War. During the Falkland campaign, the British aircraft carriers Invincible and Ark Royal were dispatched with all the available Harriers. The Harrier was about to do battle against Mirages, Daggers and Seahawks. Although the enemy's planes weren't as technically advanced as the Harrier, they outnumbered the Jump Jet by 10 to 1. Only one Sea Harrier took a hit. This was small caliber fire, and the projectile passed through the Harrier's tail. The plane was flying the next day. The planes performed faultlessly and handled a tough weather environment better than any other aircraft of its day. Amongst the small number of countries that use Harriers is Spain. They designate their Harriers as VA-1 Matadors. The training craft is the EAV-1. The Matadors are also used on Spain's 2 aircraft carriers. The distinct aerial on top of the fuselage permits the pilot to talk to ground troops and helicopters. The Spanish contingent consists of 11 single-seat Matadors and a pair of 2-seater trainer versions. The Harrier's known service record consists of action in the Falklands, Desert Storm, Bosnia, Afghanistan and most recently in Iraq. It took some time to convince the British government of the Harrier's worth. However, they did finally place an order. It was expected that the Harrier would operate from the 2 British aircraft carriers, Ark Royal and Eagle. It was from the Eagle that the first sea flight trials were conducted. 2 Harriers were finally given the chance to prove their worth. All takeoffs were conventional, and even in this mode, the ship's catapult system wasn't required. Combat simulation was carried out with the planes fitted with inert munitions and extended fuel tanks. Landings were made with the ship at full steam and in reasonably rough conditions. The Harriers proved themselves to be very versatile planes and combat capable. The Harrier, however, was still not taken seriously. During 1971, the Harrier began service with the 1st Squadron of the US Marine Corps. The US designated the plane AV-8A. They were a simpler version of the British plane, but they carried the AIM-9 Sidewinder air-to-air missile. The plane, armed with the Sidewinder, was ideal for rapid reaction air defense missions. Later, these planes were updated and were equipped with the Big Sea Eagle anti-ship missile. This large missile had a range of over 70 miles and was radar capable. Only the large carriers were able to withstand the explosive power of the Sea Eagle. The Sea Harriers were also fitted with the devastating 2-inch rockets. This is a demonstration of a training exercise on a towed target. These rockets could be launched 72 at a time from 2 pod launchers. This weapon was used extensively in the Falklands campaign. The Sea Harrier also carried the short to medium version of the Sidewinder air-to-air missile. Toss bombing or horizontal lay-down bombing was also possible with the Sea Harrier. Another of the Harrier's weaponry that was used in the Falklands campaign is the BL-75 5-cluster bomb dispenser. These are ideal weapons to take out airfields. Short takeoffs in the Harrier, particularly the earlier models, have been described as tricky. The pilot needed to have 3 hands, one for the throttle, one for the stick, and the third for the lever that controls the direction of the Harrier's swiveling exhaust nozzles. The smarts of the F-35 will be particularly appreciated by pilots flying the F-35B STOVL version. An F-35B pilot, in contrast, simply flies the plane with stick and throttle, with the software handling the fine details of short takeoff. The operation of the Harrier goes like this. In the cockpit, 2 levers protrude from a rectangular box. One lever is the throttle and the other is the nozzle angle selector. The position of the controls is such that the pilot doesn't need to look down to operate the levers. For forward propulsion, the throttle lever is simply pushed forward with the nozzle selector. For a short takeoff, throttle and nozzle selectors have a preset position. The nozzles are angled at 55 degrees. Hover or VTO is achieved by pulling back the nozzle selector to the vertical position, which has a fixed stop. For braking, the lever is lifted, then shifted into the braking position. The pilot can go at any time during flight to maximum braking, which makes the Harrier a very difficult plane for conventional fighters to follow. This is a later version of the Harrier. It's the GR5. It can be visually identified by its longer wingspan. The wing, which was made by McDonnell Douglas, is carbon fibre, and it has the strength to carry 1.5 times as much fuel as the earlier Harriers. The GR5 has 11 weapon stations, which include 4 under each wing. The plane's weapon load exceeds 9,000 pounds. G5's testing proved the plane was a great improvement over the previous Harrier, but the biggest advancement was the ability of the plane to be able to carry twice the weapons load as the earlier model. The British pilots train constantly. They also take time out to practice and improve their display routines. It's been about 40 years since the first VTOLs were performed, and the Harrier and its predecessors have been entertaining people at air shows for about 30 years. It's predicted the Harrier will remain in service for some time, but the JSF 35 is the shape of things to come. To improve on the Harrier's system, Lockheed engineers fitted a lift fan just behind the cockpit. During flight, the fan is aerodynamically hidden behind closed doors that swivel open for landing. The Air Force F-35A has a refueling boom socket behind the cockpit, while the F-35B and F-35C have a retractable refueling probe on the right side of the nose. The performance of the F-35 matches and in some areas exceeds any of today's top guns. But the F-35 goes several steps beyond any of the top guns with stealth capability, increased range on internal fuel tanks, and it has the state-of-the-art avionics. The combination of stealth and the fully integrated weapon system allows the F-35 pilot to positively identify and precisely strike mobile targets in high-threat environments in all weather, day or night. This adds up to unmatched combat effectiveness, enabling first look, first shot. The most current data predicts the JSF F-35 will cost 40 to 50% less to operate and support than today's Top Gun planes. That concludes this episode of Flying Through Time. Be sure to join us again when we continue to explore the people, the planes and the companies that have contributed to our history of flight.